Every action in the human body is governed by a centralized biological command center. This system operates under three strict foundational directives: to control physical movement, to regulate internal metabolism, and to instantly communicate data across the entire physical structure. The structural and functional baseline of this entire operation is a single specialized cell, the neuron. Millions of these individual units physically link together, weaving a dense, interconnected communication web that reaches every organ, muscle, and layer of tissue. To manage this immense computational load, the network relies on a strict operational rule. Data is processed exclusively through closed, bidirectional signal loops. Every physical interaction we have with the external world is captured, transmitted, and resolved as a discrete circuit of biological data. The sequence begins with the sensory pathway. When encountering a stimulus, like a sharp impact, a sensory neuron activates. It carries data from peripheral tissue straight to the brain's central processing unit. The loop completes via the motor pathway. The brain generates an executive command and fires it back down a separate track of motor neurons. This command strikes the specific muscle groups in the leg, forcing them to violently contract and pull the foot away from the hazard. In cases of severe neurological trauma or specific psychiatric conditions, this motor response pathway can deteriorate. The clinical result is a broken loop. The body perfectly senses the painful stimulus and delivers the data to the brain, but it lacks the structural ability to execute the physical retreat. Managing these immediate, conscious reactions to the outside world, while simultaneously running critical internal survival protocols, requires the nervous system to heavily segregate its architecture. This diagram outlines the hierarchy of that segregation. At the top level, the network splits into the central and peripheral hubs. The peripheral system divides its workload again into two operational sub-branches, determined entirely by the presence of conscious control. The first division is the somatic system, derived from the Greek word soma, meaning body. It is the exclusive manager of all voluntary biological action. If you intentionally move a skeletal muscle, or process conscious sensory inputs like physical touch and external odors, you are using the somatic domain. There is one major anatomical exception to this somatic sensory pathway: visual light. Rather than routing through the peripheral somatic network, retinal and optic nerves bypass it entirely, plugging directly into the brain via specialized cranial pathways. Operating entirely outside of this conscious control is the opposing peripheral division, the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic domain manages the continuous, involuntary life support protocols required to keep the organism alive. It dictates your heart rate, maintains your respiratory rhythms, and drives the mechanics of digestion. By segregating these processes, the autonomic system acts as a biological firewall. It ensures that temporary conscious distraction cannot accidentally halt the vital metabolic functions keeping you alive. But the autonomic system itself is fractured into two distinctly opposing forces, dictated by the environmental threat level. The first is the sympathetic system, the body's aggressive emergency survival protocol. It remains dormant until triggered by sudden environmental danger, intense stress, or the presence of a predator. Once triggered, it instantly floods the neural network, hyper-regulating the body's hardware to generate an immediate, explosive fight or flight response. Cardiac output accelerates. Airways physically dilate to force maximum oxygen into skeletal muscles, preparing for intense physical exertion. Simultaneously, the system shuts down non-essential internal functions. Digestion halts and salivation dries up, diverting all available cellular energy outward. This massive data surge relies on a specific anatomical highway to reach the organs quickly, the 31 pairs of spinal nerves, acting as an emergency broadcast network. The sympathetic state forces the body into a strict biological trade-off. It sacrifices long-term cellular maintenance in exchange for explosive short-term physical capability. To counteract this severe stress state, the nervous system relies on a physiological antagonist, the parasympathetic system. This pathway activates only when the environmental threat passes and the stressor is neutralized. It is a dedicated recovery protocol designed to forcefully drag the body back down to a safe metabolic baseline. It executes an active downregulation. The previously dilated pupils constrict, and the expanded airways narrow back to their resting capacity. It then kickstarts the halted internal processes. The digestive tract resumes breaking down nutrients, salivation returns, and normal blood flow routes back to the core organs. To drive this recovery sequence, the parasympathetic commands largely bypass the spinal route, relying heavily on the 12 cranial nerves connected directly to the brainstem. This creates a geographical separation in the hardware: 31 spinal nerves pushing the body to panic, and 12 cranial nerves pulling it back to safety. Biological survival depends on two distinct mechanical capabilities: the ability to escape immediate danger, and the subsequent deployment of specialized hardware to systematically terminate the panic response. When placed side by side, these two autonomic systems wage a continuous, antagonistic tug-of-war. For cardiac output, the sympathetic command accelerates heart rate, while the parasympathetic acts as the biological brake. With digestion, roles invert. Sympathetic inhibits gastric activity, while parasympathetic stimulates it to absorb nutrients. This dual control dichotomy allows the human body to aggressively react to external chaos while rigidly protecting its internal metabolic order. The physical stakes of this architecture become obvious when the closed-loop system breaks down. In scenarios of extreme physiological or psychological shock, the sympathetic protocol fires perfectly, but the parasympathetic system fails to initiate the recovery reset. The biological command becomes trapped. The brain processes the initial threat, but fails to send the motor response instructing the organs to stand down. Without parasympathetic relief, the body suffers high blood pressure, compounding distress and physiological collapse. But when the internal architecture is operating correctly, the human nervous system flawlessly manages millions of conflicting signals every single second. Human health is a highly dynamic, continuous physiological negotiation between arousal and recovery.